safety. I'm joined by my fellow councilors, Councilor Hogan, Councilor Gathers, Green, and Councilor Chose. Thank you, Fire Department. This meeting is to just go over the item for the tower item and just walk us through a little bit as to, you know, we understand the inflation, but, you know, kind of walk us through as to maybe a little bit of overview of how we got here, and then get into how the price has changed and all of that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief.
So in front of you is a timeline. With me is Kelly Haggerty from City Engineering, and I just want to just inform everybody that right from the beginning of this project, City Engineering and CNS engineers were with us from the very beginning once we got approval from the mayor's office to try to move forward. The head engineer for CNS was in all of our meetings and basically gave us a guideline with help from Kelly and the engineering department. So I think one of the questions that has kind of come up, maybe not directly, was that we thought that this project was only going to be $2 million of the ARPA money. I never ever gave up money out of my capital plan. I always had money in my capital plan to help with the project. We looked various ways to try to make this project work, but once we got the ARPA money, I never forfeited that money, and the goal was to keep the project at $2 million and have this $1 million to continue to improve our fire training facility. So I can read down this timeline if you'd like, or if you guys want to just read through it and then ask questions, however you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, give us a few seconds. I think the councilors are looking over it. Was this sent electronically, Chief, and I just didn't see it?
I sent it to you this morning, yes.
This morning?
Yes. I sent it to your city email and your work personal email.
Yeah, okay.
So, Chief, I think this is more of a question for budget, I guess, for Tim.
Okay.
But so I guess, so and I could be misremembering this part of it, but when we were talking about it, I didn't understand that it was going to be $3 million when we approved it. My understanding was it was going to be $2 million, and that could be my fault. But I understand there's money in the capital improvement project, you know, CIP. But I guess the question is, I think, unrelated fire, but other projects we've done may be listed in the capital projects list, and then we've used ARPA money instead. And my understanding, and this is not for you, but for other projects, that ARPA money has replaced the money that was in the capital project plan, and it's not meant to be in addition to it. So I think that's more of a question for Tim, is when we approve projects that had previously been listed in the capital projects and use ARPA money, does that replace it, or is it in addition to what we were already planning to do?
Well, I think the honest answer is probably there isn't a direct policy, so it's not like all ARPA money replaces capital money, or that it doesn't.
But do you, okay, let's say the Burnett Park pool, right? Like we had that in the capital plan, I believe. We're using ARPA money to.
Which project did you say? The
Burnett Park pool.
Burnett Park pool.
We're now using ARPA money. So now that is no longer needed in the capital plan. It's not like we still keep that money in and add it to, right? Am I wrong?
Well, in theory, there gets to be a bit of a.
Kelly?
I think Burnett is also had issues. We had huge change orders, and we had to use the ARPA, and I think we're using both with that because of the overages, I'm pretty sure. So I think it depends on that just happens to be one I know about. I don't know what the other.
I guess it doesn't matter now. It is what it is. I don't remember the conversation then being that this was a $3 million project when we approved the ARPA money.
It was up to $2 million.
Yeah. So I don't, that's just the biggest thing. I don't remember it this way, but it's fine. It is what it is.
So yeah.
I will say one thing we did a year ago that we didn't do this year is, and you can still do it, but the capital plan, I basically am delivering it right around New Year's. Yeah. It's almost like a New Year's Eve present. And So you have the ability to have a committee meeting to review it all, and a year ago we did, and this year we didn't. So I think all the more it would be clear if we had that, and we didn't have that this year. So that may have added to the misunderstanding.
So when we put money into capital plan, is it my understanding that they are not project specific? Are they?
So the capital plan is really just a planning document that you don't authorize.
Mm-hmm.
So we're presenting it to you basically as like here's our intention, and then we come to you for each individual project. And in theory, the plan could change at any point. So we may come for items that are on the plan, or we may come for an item that popped up that wasn't in the plan. And we're sort of managing that to have really like a targeted level of borrowing for the year. And so to the extent a project falls off, then that may enable something else to happen. But I would say there's lots of moving parts, so it's hard to, the plan is not always exactly what happens with the bonding.
So initially, if my recollection is correct, initially we had estimated that this tower, Chief, was going to cost $1.5 million, right? Initially, before ARPA money. Was that?
We had $1.5 million that we requested in our capital plan before ARPA was even a thing, before ARPA even became known that it was going to happen, or it even was an acronym. For years, I was putting money in the capital plan to try to build a tower, whether it was going to be $1 million one year and build it over multiple years. We were looking for different ways to make this tower happen. So I always had the money in the plan, and then when the ARPA money came, I had the money in the plan. The previous year, ARPA money came. I asked for the $2 million. I came in front of you. It was passed unanimously. We started working more in depth with CNS and the city engineering to figure out, based off the timeline. And we were hoping not to use this $1 million in capital money because we were trying to keep it to $2 million. But as prices escalated because of fuel, supply chain issues, the increase of steel and all those types of things, it was becoming apparent that we were going to need to come back and ask for money. The estimate we got was at $2.89 million, I think December 21st, I believe, on that timeline. Well, I got the timeline right here. Yeah. Whatever the date was, around the end of the year. And I was just waiting for the RFPs to come out just in case it went overage. But before we got to that bid opening on my way over here, I was praying that this was going to be right around $2 million because I had another $1 million that I could address other deficiencies with our department. But now I can't. So we, as troubled as everybody is about the escalation of construction costs, I am too, because that's another thing that I can't do for our department that we can't help protect the citizens with. So I always had this money in the budget. We were going to use it to increase our, improve our training facility. And when I came for the $2 million, the $1 million was always in the project. We were hoping not to use it on this tower. The only control cost we had was the tower, and that price was increasing every 30 days, 5%. So we were committed to doing this, and that's why the timeline's in front of you, and that's how the money was all planned to be working. But I originally had up to $1.5 million. This year was $1 million in there. So the goal was to have it up to $3 million, but praying that it would come in around $2 million when the bids came back, but it didn't happen. And
So I would take that when you had initially planned that this project was going to cost $1.5 million, I take that you had looked at the prices. You had done your homework to estimate. Now, I'm saying this with understanding that there's inflation, right? There's inflation and there's supply chain issues and all of that, right? But initially, you had assessed it well and estimated well that it was going to cost $1.5 million. Now, we are asking this, Chief, because it's the cost is almost like 10 times what the inflation.
I
today.
interrupt as a new counselor here because I'm looking at your timeline, which I think is great. March of 2021, they estimated the project would cost $3 million. Is that correct?
Well, we had money allocated with the ARPA money and the capital plan to spend
For
that for the
$3
tower.
million.
Yes, for the project.
So it's now at 3.58. Right? So
Now, if
it's
that
really-
was misconstrued and misunderstood, I apologize with the lack of communication. When we met in August of last year, you guys asked a bunch of questions. I tried to be transparent and answer them the best that I could to my ability, but all along, I had, and like I said, you guys worked with Tim Rudd for a long time. I try to be as frugal with our capital plan as possible. I had money set aside to go towards this project, whether it was needed or not, and it ended up being that we needed it. I came to you guys in August to get approval for ARPA because we had just got approval from the city administration to use ARPA money. So I wanted to get that out there, get that approved, and then we had to start working with city engineering, even though we were already working with them, to come up with the actual estimate. And then that estimate was around $3 million. That's what it came out to be at the end of last year. I mean, but it just escalated with the cost of all the materials and all the different things.
And, I mean, I'll totally back up the chief that he's been asking for the tower for the whole time. I've certainly been in this role. And there is, I think, kind of a, I don't know if it's a policy question, or there are kind of aspirational projects that department heads want, and there are financial constraints that make it so they don't always fit. And so in the capital plan a year and a half ago, the fire tower was an item to be discussed, and it's also one of the items that's kind of on the fringe of like, do we have the money or not? So at that time, the way it was handled is we put in, so there's one question of, do you list these aspirational projects in a way that is clear that we would like to do it, even though we may not have all the money, or do you leave it off completely? And I erred on the side of adding it. And then, so even some of the million was essentially like to be determined money. I don't think the initial million that was in the CIP a year and a half ago was thought to be a comprehensive estimate necessarily, but it's a way to get it on board and elevate it to the level of, hey, we have this in our plan, it may be a bigger deal, we don't know how to pay for it. And this is like another example of a project like this is the second intake pipe for the water department, which has been a project that they've asked for a long time. It's a big cost that seems like a priority that we'd like to do, that we put it in. It might be we might put in a little bit of money to be able to study it more to get a better idea. I put a hold that we want other funding because it's a way to reinforce the ask for state and federal money. And then ARPA kind of came in and made it so we could like actually do it. And then I do think there's an uncertainty around the cost in the way in which they enter the plan. And it probably is not, I mean, it certainly is not unique to fire. It is, I'd say it probably applies to like the water intake pipe, probably some other projects, but there is a like how exactly to handle projects that do require other funding where we have a sense that they're going to be substantial, but we don't really know for sure.
Yeah, so, and kind of to respond to Councilor Schultz, so I'll go back and look at the hearings again, and I could be misremembering, but my memory of it was that we thought the whole project was going to be $2 million, right? That's what we thought it was. And I remember, I think Councilor Hogan had asked, like, if it was in the CIP for 1.5, why did it go up to 2? And then I think we had a conversation about that. So I didn't understand when I was voting for that it was a $3 million in total project. And that's the biggest distinction here. And everything, like, this is a worthwhile project. I'm not against it, but that's just the disconnect between the communication for me. But I didn't think we were approving 2/3 of the cost when we approved the $2 million for ARPA. But
I agree. I mean, I thought it was the whole thing. $2 million was everything. And I'm a little disturbed. What's the final, how much costs is CNS? How much are they paying? They said $108,000, but we keep on going along. CNS does this, CNS does that.
Yeah, they're 108 for design.
For the whole deal.
For the design, yep.
For everything.
They did an environmental assessment also.
So we wrote them a check in July of 21, and they're still on the job, God bless them, right until the end. May 4th.
Well, we give them progress payments as they go. We don't just give them $108,000. We give them, there's like milestones they have to hit, and then we pay them.
That
they need
also
miles.
the million that Chief says we spent, I think something like 758,000 is actually an encumbrance, so it's money that we know we're gonna spend but hasn't really been paid out. So it's like you're getting an accounting land, but I think that relates to her staggered payment.
I'm just, CNS, that's for doing all this work they've done.
So there was another work order for, I think, 25,000 for environmental, because this site, DEC,
What's her total?
133. Yeah, 133.
Because like Councilor Green said, I thought the $2 million took in everything. So is that out of the original $2 million you asked for, the 100,000, 130,000?
Councilor Dan Downs, First Deputy Chief. Just as I got up there to work with Chief Mons and said, what are our goals? I had to get the whole historical perspective. The $1.5 million that was budgeted was rough estimates based on the cost of a building and what we thought it would cost to erect the building. That was a rough estimate, and there was asks around to departments around, said, why don't we make this kind of a county-wide, let's see if we can do this, let's see if we can get some additional funding to do that. The real stickler here that nobody's, I guess, is saying, everybody knows the costs go up and stuff like that. The grounds that the training division is built on is terrible soil for construction. That's been known. These piles need to be driven 150 to 200 feet down to rest the structure on there. That is taking a normal construction cost, that all the building materials are going up and driving this project through the roof because of the times we're in. So the price of the building plus the construction, and then we were adding on some environmental site work. We said maybe we can get this done for around $2 million. We got to wait and see what they actually say, how many piles based on the design, which we actually cut the footprint down so that there was less piles going into the ground to try and keep this to a reasonable number. Even after doing that, you see where the number is. So we've done as much as we could. The environmental of that site, when I say environmental, it's loose soil.
Well, we knew that, Chief, going into the
We
project.
did know that, but it was that, we couldn't get that estimated cost until we got CNS to do their environmental work and have that go. So we knew it was going to be tough, but it was a guess number that we thought maybe we can get it. If it goes a little over, it's 2.1 million. We'll have the capital money to cover the excess. As we got further and further, then you know what happened in the world, and that's why it went crazy. But the good intent was to try and get that at the 2 million.
I appreciate that. And I think it's somewhat of a communications thing, that I think we thought it was a $2 million project. It's now significantly more, and totally understandable reasons for why that is. But when, ideally, when we knew in, August of 2021, if someone had reached out to the council to say, hey, we're going to have to come back to you for additional approval because of this, rather than I think now where it's like, you approve it in this meeting or else costs could go up again, and we feel a little constrained by it. And that's not any individual's fault. I'm not saying it is, but that's, I think, the perception of what it is.
And like Budget Director Rudd said, I think after I got approved for the $2 million in the capital plan that was delivered to everybody, there was a line in there for the fire training tower for money in the capital plan. So it was as transparent as I could be. I didn't call you and say, hey, because we weren't sure what the cost was going to be, but I always had that money in my budget. Amongst all the things we were trying to correct in our department and improve, I always kept that money in the budget for a day like today to actually make this project get to a completion. But so I understand during our council meeting, in last August, the communication, and I went back and I watched the videos like you were saying, and I understand how it could have been miscommunicated, but based on the documents that are delivered to the council that I worked with Budget Director Rudd, I always had that money in my plan. So you approved $2 million, and then the capital plan came out for this fiscal year, and there was still $1 million in there. So I just wanted to make that clear. I always had that money in there.
I appreciate that, Chief. But when I looked at it, I thought yes, that money's in there, but we're not gonna need it because we're using ARPA, and therefore we'll be able to use it for other fire department. And that's the way I read it, and that was maybe incorrect on my part, but that's why
Okay.
I didn't understand we were gonna need to use that.
I understand, but I will say this, if we were 100% positive we weren't gonna use the money, I would have taken that money and used it for some of our other deficiencies in our priority list, like a fire truck. I wouldn't just kept the money in there for no reason. I would have tried to spend the money on some of the things we've identified as needs to protect the city. So I'll just leave it at that, but that's.
I mean, I think at this point, you know, the project has already started, and I think next time we need to really pay close attention to some of this costs, you know, because for me, when we approved the $2 million, my understanding was that the project being $1.5 million, you know, giving you extra would make up for whatever discrepancy we need to fill. But for it coming back, you know, like $1.5 million more, it leave a lot of questions. So, and I hope you do understand why we are like this.
No,
Now,
I totally understand
Yeah.
the questions.
now the next question is, you had initially, when we had this conversation last year, you had initially said that you were going to enlist some other partners that could potentially be
Councilor-
using this, right?
Yes, but we're not at that point yet. We've had this location for decades, right? I've been the first chief to implement fee schedules for things that we've been doing to go outside the city to get reimbursed for some of the services. This facility's just been used for our partners. We're not at the point to put a fee schedule out until we get this completed. But OCC uses it, other fire departments do come and use it, we do joint training, so if something happens like what happened in Buffalo and we have to have joint, we're just training together. The goal is to have a fee schedule out to let people come and rent this like other municipalities have. But, and I sent that fee schedule of our proposed schedule, but we just been stuck on getting this project with the engineering to the point where the bids went out and they came back, and that's the goal. Right, and I already have commitments from other departments that are gonna use the facility, and they're already using them. And like I said, the fire chief show, it's one of the biggest fire department conferences in the state. Last year, in COVID, it brought in $6 million with a reduced participation. In 2019, it brought in $10 million of economic. So we're working with all these different partners, but as you all know, having MOUs and MOAs with outside entities outside the city, it doesn't always work smooth. We had conversations with the county executive's office. I've had conversations with multiple different entities, but when the ARPA money became available, it was pretty clear this was our opportunity to build something so our firefighters could be trained to protect our city. I talked to Councilor Hogan and I don't know who else. They're building these tall buildings everywhere in the city. These buildings weren't made for people to live in. The place you were at yesterday on Wolf Street, our firefighters, the only time they're gonna actually be able to have an experience is at a fire when somebody is having an emergency. We can't train for that right now.
No, Chief,
I just want to be clear with that.
I want us to be clear. I think this body, what we are saying is the intention of the project
Yep.
and the benefit that it will bring. I think we all agree, right? We all agree that this is a good move. It's just that the changes in the price here is crazy,
I
right?
understand.
And initially it was after $2 million. You come back and you want another $1.5 million, in which we understand is from within the capital project. For me, the next question for me is, we use this money, there may be another project that is coming up. I don't know, but you got other questions? You got questions, Councilor Driscoll?
What's the, how many years is this tower gonna be around?
We're hoping for at least 50 years. I mean,
50 years out of it.
that's the goal. Even more.
So I just have a question. I asked clerk to get the August
oh, sorry.
2021 legislation that was approved in August.
Yes.
And it says that the $2 million of ARPA money will be used toward the purchase of materials and labor needed. So I don't see where this says it's the total cost of the project, and I'm sure that's what was implied and that's what everybody understood. But if this legislation says it's to be used toward, I don't see why an extra 1.5, given the unknowns, is an issue. So. I'm
And
sorry to-
I'll add the new,
It certainly is an issue, Counselor.
Well, it
I mean,
costs
it's
money, I
like
understand,
when
but-
it's presented to us after we get the agenda on Tuesday, and we look through the agenda, and that's a sort of quick study for a lot of us counselors, 84 items or so. And without any kind of warning, it appears on the agenda, it's incumbent of us to ask those questions.
I mean, I think Councilor Green's point that this was a communication issue is a valid one, because the capital plan that was shared with the council in January does have this identified as $3 million. So I mean, I certainly,
Millions of, looking at capital plans, just like the budget director said, a lot of them are aspirational. Until they end up on the agenda with a committee meeting or anything like that, I don't consider it spent money.
that's fair. But I mean, to say that suddenly this project doubled in cost with no warning, I think it's more of a communication problem that, you know, could we have called a committee meeting prior to it being on the agenda? Absolutely, and I think that probably would have cleared up a lot of questions. But I don't want the impression to be that somehow we tried to, you know, pull a fast one or anything like that. It's just the information was out there and it wasn't proactively communicated, and could have done a better job there, so.
I didn't mean to imply.
No, I know, but, you know, to the timeline there, you know, the cost had always been, you know, we hoped it to be a not to exceed number of $3 million. And I think, you know, the chief has made the point that that $1 million was in there just in case, hoping we didn't have to use it. But now we do have to use it. And now, because of the supply chain issues and delays, you know, now there's an additional, I think it's, you know, $580,000 that we need in addition to what's already in ARPA and what was already planned for in the capital plan.
Who won the bid? Who?
The lowest bidder was
Okay.
It hasn't been
How
a-
many people bid?
It hasn't been awarded yet, but that was the lowest bid.
So when we vote on ARPA stuff, is the assumption that we're adding money to the existing capital? Like, that's not been my understanding.
Well, I think probably, you know, and I think like a lot of us, maybe I account for some of the traffic too. I watched the August study session where the chief came in front, and, you know, I don't think it was intentional because he did speak to the capital plan, but I think a question of what's the total anticipated cost of this project was something that I don't think was communicated. And obviously we could have communicated it. We don't have to wait for the council to ask for that question. But, you know, there are things that, you know, we put $1.5 million in our ARPA plan for the sanitation overhaul. It's going to cost a lot more than that. And so there's going to be money in the capital plan to try and pay for those costs. So I don't think, certainly there are some things that ARPA can cover the entire cost for, but some of it is just, you know, using some of that money to put towards the project. And so
I remember Councilor Hogan asking, why did it go from 1.5 to 2? And the answer wasn't, actually, it's 3. It was explaining why it was 2, right?
that, I mean, that's not what I saw in the August meeting. I heard Chief explaining the amounts that were in the capital plan, but there wasn't a clear indication that this is the total cost of the project.
All right, other questions?
Well, I just to make a note, if it might have been a different thing if we knew it was going to be 3 million and a half at the end.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and again,
That's something that we, you know, I'm not saying, implying anything or anything, but
Yeah.
I certainly probably would have looked at it a little different.
yeah, I think that certainly could have been communicated. I mean, you know, the sanitation overhaul, we're looking at probably $10 or $11 million. So 1.5,
Which is it, Corey, 10 or 11?
we're going to find out. Trying to get those carts in as soon as we can before prices go up. But, you know, so again, you know, I don't think it was intentional on either side, but I don't think, you know, it is in the capital plan as $3 million, but understanding that sometimes the capital plan is aspirational. But, you know, the real ask here is to authorize $1 million that's already in the capital plan for the fire department towards this project, and then the additional 580K because of, you know, delays in supply chain demand and all that jazz.
Now, so is it safe to say this is it, or?
If we, I mean, this is the bid that we need to lock in, because the bid is only good for a certain amount of time. And so, but if we lock them in, that would be, yeah, 45, it's good for 45 days. And so the contractor would, you know, stick to that. June 19th, yeah, so it's good till June 19th.
So after this, it should be,
I think
Locked and loaded.
There is a 10% contingency. The part that doesn't have a firm price is the electrical, right? And then, so that part still, we have an estimate in there, and then we have a contingency. So in theory, this should be enough money, I guess is the answer based on right now. But there's the
You don't have the
electrical part
electrical
that,
in there?
well, it's in, but it's an estimate because nobody bid. Because each part gets bid separate.
So in that sense,
So what's the estimate for the electrical, Chief?
I believe they thought it was gonna come in
What was it?
around $45,000 to $50,000, so we put 100,000 in to make sure that there was our contingency, so that's in this dollar amount.
And what was that 10% contingency, I think I heard you say?
The 10% contingency is about, sorry, I'm short, 240,000,
Okay.
which,
Well, we got, we can just, O'Connell just.
that should
give us
cover any
streetlights. Why don't we
unforeseen
just-
conditions, anything that we, I mean, typically we do that in all of our projects because something comes up, change orders, something, they find something that we weren't expecting.
so, and Chief, it's good for us here. Remind me again, what's the estimated revenue from outsiders using this? Again, what was it? Do you remember? Because I think you had indicated when we had that discussion.
Well, I just referred to the economic impact when we have people using our facility for this fire chief show. Tens of millions of dollars over the last few years. The city's already enjoyed that money off of the training grounds we have. This fee schedule we have, that's secondary. The most important reason we want this training tower is to train our firefighters that are on our roster right now to respond to our constituents. That's the number one reason. The cost of what we're gonna bring in, it's gonna be like any business that has a demand and supply. We're gonna market it, and we're hopeful that fire departments are gonna come and train. There's 58 fire departments in the county. There's not that many places that can train to this level. And so I don't have an estimate on what we're gonna bring in. As we get closer to it, we'll put out a fee schedule, and the goal is to have, when people utilize the facility, to charge them a fee. That's the goal. I sent out the fee schedule to you. That's our proposal, but I haven't, we wanted to get this project over the finish line before we started charging people for the cost of using the facility. So I don't have that answer right now.
I was asking because, you know, as you said, there were some aspiration, this was an aspirational project initially.
Yep.
In terms of cost. But I'm also asking in terms of fees, what did you project? That's what I was asking.
Yep.
In the exercise, in no way have we ever thought this is a project that pays for itself with the future revenue. I think we did some basic napkin math, but it's not that kind of thing. It would be, because you'd have costs of hosting as well. So maybe it brings in a little revenue and that helps in the future, but I really wouldn't emphasize the revenue and the precision. It's not a huge amount.
I would think adjacent though, right? Like, as the chief mentioned, if conventions and other things, if a fire department comes from away, there'll be economic generation from them getting meals in the area and hotels and, no?
No, I just think this is going to be a community benefit. Well, many things.
Yeah,
the
of course,
city
of
fire
course.
department and-
But I think there will be some potential.
Yeah, and
Yeah, perhaps not the direct cost of,
Yes.
you know, people renting it out, but people coming to the region and, you know, I think it might be more intangible to measure, but probably help out over the long term.
And that's the goal, just like with the ambulance, with our rescue and hazmat. Some of the services we provide that we're trying to just get as much revenue as we can and bring back into the budget so we can provide a better service, and that's the goal. So,
Okay. With stuff like American High, you know, filming in the region, we thought about a reboot
do
of Towering,
naming rights,
Towering
man.
Inferno, you know, like a reboot, Steve McQueen, you know?
naming rights, whatever.
I don't, naming rights, I like that. Some creative uses. All right, maybe not. Just throwing stuff out there.
I can just honestly say, without a doubt, that we all can agree that this is a great thing. You know, just reiterating what's been going on. It's just uncontrolled, I can say controlled surprises of pricing, and that's all. That's just the biggest issue. But I commend you guys a lot. I think that, having you come before us and explain everything along with the other chiefs, we can see that this will put, the Syracuse Fire Department at another bar. You know what I mean? You've continuously been raising the department along with the other chiefs to help train the guys and get them better at their jobs, and that way we can be more proactive instead of reactive. So I can say that I'm all good, but hopefully with no other surprises, that's all.
I would just be budget director teacher for a moment, which is like, budgets are just plans, right? Financial plans. So we basically have two financial plans, one for our general operations and one for our longer lived assets. And the one for the general operations, we essentially make the plan and we submit the whole thing to you and you approve the whole thing. And then we can kind of move money within a department, but if we need to move money beyond a department, from department to department, we come to you and ask permission to move the money. And then the capital plan does not have that blanket authorization. So we're making the plan for the long-lived assets, submitting it as like an FYI, and then we are coming and seeking approval for each project at the time, which I do think makes it harder to totally understand. And there can be times where we ask, where we have uncertainty around the payments, so we may ask for like bonding authority, an amount that may be larger than what actually happens in the end. And the practice has certainly been not to like deauthorize bonding authority. So it does create circumstances where I guess the administration sort of has some flexibility to be making decisions as we move forward. And one thing I would highlight with fire, because they do it from my perspective right, and I think almost nobody does. And as a former counselor, it was one of the things that seemed strange and was almost sounded not right, but essentially the plan happens in January. So just this morning, we had a rating agency call because we go to borrow in June. So we list all the projects, the dollar amounts, and then we go get bonds once a year for the projects. So fire is really good about getting their plan, and then they submit their, essentially their request for the ability to bond for the projects in the upcoming year. And it always seemed weird as a counselor, because here it is in February, you're getting a request for them to borrow money for the upcoming year. But that's actually the way it should be, because then we are issuing the bonds in June so that we can pay for them in July. If they didn't do that, if they waited till July to ask for permission, they wouldn't have been bonded in June, and then we have to kind of cover that cost for the full year till we go to market again. So they really do manage their stuff, and I get the capital side, it may have a little more on, not uncertainty, but because you're not blanket approving the plan and then we're constrained by the plan, it's each project is unique. It kind of requires a different lens.
I think myself and Council Driscoll would take care of the electrical portion of it. You guys might have a real training then, you know what I mean?
All right, other questions, councilors?
Good.
No, Chief, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
WCNY, we are done.